The last rays of Arizona sunlight bled across the horizon like an open wound. Jacob Mercer sat alone in his cabin, a half-empty bottle of whiskey balanced on his knee, the amber liquid catching the dying light. The wooden table before him held 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 cups, a ritual he had performed every evening for 3 years, even though 2 of the chairs would never be filled again. His calloused fingers traced the edge of a faded photograph. Sarah smiled up at him, her hand resting on their son Thomas's shoulder. The boy was 7 in that picture, gap-toothed and bright-eyed, holding up a wooden horse Jacob had carved for him. That horse now sat on the mantel gathering dust beside 2 simple crosses Jacob had hammered together from scrap wood. Consumption had taken them both within a month of each other. Jacob had been a Union Army medic during the war, had saved countless men from infections and amputations, had pulled soldiers back from death's door with nothing but whiskey and determination. But when the fever came for his own family, when Sarah's cough turned bloody and Thomas grew pale and thin, all his knowledge meant nothing. He had held their hands and watched them fade powerless as a child. The whiskey burned going down. Jacob set the bottle on the table with too much force, and the sound echoed in the empty cabin. He stood abruptly, needing air, needing anything but these 4 walls that still smelled faintly of sickness and loss. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under a sky turning purple and orange. His horse, a gray mare named Patience, stood in the small corral he had built years ago when life still held promise. The vegetable garden Sarah had planted struggled on, kept alive more by habit than hope. Jacob walked past the 2 small graves, his boots crunching on the rocky soil. He did not look at them. He never did any more. The Arizona Territory in 1883 was a place where the old world and the new collided with violence. The Apache Wars had dragged on for decades, a brutal conflict between the United States Army and the Apache people who refused to surrender their ancestral lands. Jacob had deliberately built his small ranch on the fringe of this conflict, far enough from Fort Bowie to avoid the soldiers, far enough from the Apache strongholds to avoid the raids, or so he had thought. He walked toward the eastern ridge where the land dropped away into Apache Canyon. The canyon was a jagged scar in the earth, all red rock and twisted juniper trees, a place where sound carried strangely and shadows moved in ways that made a man's hand drift toward his rifle. Jacob came here sometimes when the cabin felt too small, when the silence of his own company became unbearable. The sun was almost gone when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the evening wind. A groan, human, pained. Jacob froze his hand instinctively, moving to the Colt revolver on his hip. Apaches rarely made noise when they moved, and the Army patrols always announced themselves with the thunder of hooves and the jingle of equipment. This was something else, something wrong. He moved carefully down the rocky slope, his eyes scanning the failing light. The sound came again, weaker this time, from behind an outcropping of red stone. Jacob rounded the rock and stopped dead. A woman lay sprawled in the dust, and she was massive. Even collapsed and broken, she was clearly over 6 feet tall, her shoulders broader than most men Jacob had known. Her body was thick with muscle, her arms corded with strength that had not been enough to save her from whatever violence had brought her here. She wore the leather and cloth of an Apache warrior, though it was torn and soaked with blood. Her long black hair was matted with dirt and gore, but it was her injuries that made Jacob's breath catch. Her left leg bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken below the knee. Her right shoulder was swollen and dislocated, the arm hanging useless. Dark blood pooled beneath her, seeping from wounds across her back and side. Shell casings littered the ground around her, along with broken pieces of what had been a spear. The earth was churned and scarred, telling the story of a fight that had been brief and savage. Jacob knelt beside her, his fingers finding the pulse point on her thick neck. It was there, faint and irregular. A moth's wing flutter against his fingertips. She was alive, but barely. In the distance he heard the sound of hooves, multiple horses moving with purpose. Jacob looked up and saw a thin column of smoke rising against the darkening sky, perhaps 2 miles to the north. A signal. The army was still in the area, still hunting. If they found her, they would kill her. There would be no trial, no questions. Just a bullet and a shallow grave in the desert. Jacob looked down at the woman again. Her face, even in unconsciousness, held a fierce dignity. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and a long scar running down her left cheek from temple to chin. She had seen violence before today. She had dealt it out and survived it. His hands moved without conscious thought, finding the tight wrappings around her wrist and cutting them free with his knife. Part of him screamed that this was madness, that saving an Apache warrior would bring nothing but death to his door. But another part, the part that had once sworn an oath to preserve life, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be useful to matter, would not let him walk away. He had failed to save Sarah and Thomas. He had held their hands and watched them die despite all his knowledge, all his skill. The guilt of that failure had hollowed him out, left him a ghost haunting his own life. Not again. Not this time. Jacob gripped the woman under her arms, bracing himself, and lifted. She was incredibly heavy, solid muscle and bone, but adrenaline gave him strength he did not know he still possessed. He dragged her toward his horse, every step in agony, as her weight threatened to collapse him. The sound of hooves grew louder. A dust cloud appeared on the northern horizon, moving fast. "Damn it," Jacob growled through gritted teeth. No time for gentleness. He hauled the woman across Patience's saddle, her massive frame draped over the horse like a fallen tree. He tied her in place with the saddle rope, working with the speed of long practice. Blood dripped from her wounds, pattering onto the rocky ground. The dust cloud was closer now. Jacob could make out individual riders, at least 6 of them cavalry, by the look of their formation. He swung himself up behind the woman's unconscious form, kicked his heels into Patience's flanks, and the mare bolted forward. They crashed through scrub brush and scattered stones, the horse's hooves finding purchase on ground that seemed determined to betray them. Behind them a shout went up. They had been seen. Jacob leaned low over the horse's neck, one arm holding the woman in place, the other gripping the reins. The old mare ran like she understood what was at stake, her breath coming in, great heaving gasps. The landscape blurred past all shadow and rock in the failing light. A rifle shot cracked the air. The bullet sang past, far too close. Another shot and another. Jacob did not look back. He focused on the path ahead, on the familiar terrain that led to his ranch. The cabin was only a mile away now, but it felt like 100. They burst through a stand of juniper trees, branches whipping at Jacob's face. The woman groaned, her body shifting, and for a terrible moment, Jacob thought she would fall. He tightened his grip, his arm screaming in protest. The rotting wooden gate of his property appeared ahead. Jacob did not slow. Patience crashed through it, sending splinters flying, and they thundered into the yard. Jacob hauled back on the reins, and the mare skidded to a stop. He could still hear the cavalry behind them, but the sound was more distant now. They had not followed at full speed. Perhaps they had lost the trail in the darkness, or perhaps they simply did not care enough to chase a lone man into the night. Jacob did not wait to find out. He untied the woman and lowered her as gently as he could to the ground, then half-dragged, half-carried her toward the cabin. She was a dead weight, her body limp and unresponsive. He kicked the door open and pulled her inside, her boots scraping across the threshold. The cabin was dark. Jacob fumbled for matches, lit the oil lamp on the table, and golden light spilled across the room. It was a simple space. A bed in one corner, the table with its 3 place settings, a stone fireplace, shelves holding preserved food, and a few battered books. In another corner, covered with a canvas tarp, sat his old medical bag. He had not opened it in 3 years. Jacob laid the woman on the wooden floor. Her breathing was shallow and ragged, each breath a struggle. Blood pooled beneath her, dark and gleaming in the lamplight. He grabbed the whiskey bottle from the table, tore a strip of cloth from an old shirt, and poured the alcohol over it. His hands shook as he pressed the cloth to the worst of her wounds, a deep gash along her ribs. The woman's eyes flew open, and she screamed a sound of such raw agony that it drove into Jacob's chest like a blade. She tried to push him away, her good arm swinging wildly, catching him across the jaw and sending him sprawling. Jacob scrambled back to his feet, tasting blood. "I'm trying to help you," he said, though he doubted she understood English. She stared at him with eyes like black fire, her chest heaving. Then, just as suddenly as the strength had come, it left her. Her eyes rolled back and she collapsed again into unconsciousness. Jacob did not hesitate this time. He moved to the corner and pulled the canvas tarp away from his medical bag. Dust rose in a cloud. The leather was cracked and dry, the brass buckles tarnished, but when he opened it, everything was still there. Scalpels, forceps, needles, and catgut tourniquets, bottles of carbolic acid and laudanum. The tools of his former trade. He worked through the night. First, he cleaned the wounds as best he could, pouring whiskey over each one and wiping away the blood and dirt. The gash in her side was deep, but had missed anything vital. The wounds on her back were shallow, likely from shrapnel or ricocheting bullets. The leg was worse. The bone had snapped cleanly, but it had shifted, and Jacob had to pull it back into alignment. He braced himself, gripped her ankle and thigh, and pulled. The bone ground together with a sound that made his stomach turn. The woman groaned in her unconsciousness, but did not wake. Jacob splinted the leg with 2 pieces of wood from a broken chair, wrapping them tight with strips of cloth. Then he turned his attention to the shoulder. Dislocated shoulders were something he had dealt with countless times during the war. He positioned himself, braced his foot against her side, gripped her arm, and pulled. The shoulder popped back into place with a wet sound. Jacob bound it tight to keep it immobile. By the time he finished, the first light of dawn was creeping through the cabin's single window. Jacob sat back against the wall, exhausted, his hands sticky with blood. The woman lay before him, her chest rising and falling with more regularity, now her breathing less labored. He looked at her face in the growing light. Even battered and unconscious, there was something formidable about her. She was not beautiful in any conventional sense. Her features were too harsh, her frame too large, her body marked by too many scars. But there was a strength there, a presence that filled the small cabin. On her right wrist, just visible beneath the bandages Jacob had wrapped, was a scar he had not noticed before. It was a burn mark in the shape of a 5-pointed star, old and deliberately made. A brand. Someone had burned that mark into her flesh with intention. Jacob frowned, his mind working. Branding was not an Apache custom. It was something the army sometimes did to prisoners to mark them, to humiliate them. His stomach turned at the thought. Outside, the sound of hooves made him freeze. Jacob grabbed his Winchester rifle from beside the door and moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. A single rider approached, walking his horse slowly. The man wore the blue uniform of a cavalry officer, but no insignia Jacob recognized. He was tall and lean, his face carved from stone, a mouth set in a permanent line of disapproval. The officer stopped his horse outside the fence and called out, "Hello, the house!" Jacob did not move. "I know you're in there," the officer continued. His voice was calm, almost pleasant. "I'm Captain Ellis Drake, 3rd Cavalry, out of Fort Bowie. I'm looking for a dangerous fugitive, an Apache woman. Large, very large. Have you seen her?" Jacob's finger tightened on the rifle's trigger. Through the window he studied Drake's face. There was something wrong in those eyes, something that made Jacob's skin crawl. "No Apaches around here," Jacob called back. "Just me and my ghosts." Drake was silent for a moment. Then he smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Ghosts. Yes, I heard about your family. Tragic. Consumption wasn't a terrible way to go." Jacob's jaw clenched. "How did this man know about Sarah and Thomas, this woman I'm looking for?" Drake continued. "She's a killer. Murdered 6 soldiers at Fort Bowie just last week, ripped one man's arm clean from his socket. She's an animal, not a woman. If you see her, you'd best put a bullet in her head and save us all the trouble." "What did she want at the fort?" Jacob asked before he could stop himself. Drake's smile widened. "Funny you should ask. She was looking for someone, a little Apache boy. Her brother, we think, caused quite a scene. But there's no record of any Apache children at Fort Bowie. She was mistaken." He paused, letting that sink in. "Or perhaps she was lied to," Drake added his tone, suggesting he found the idea amusing. "Either way, she's a threat to every settler in the territory. When we find her, there won't be a trial, just a rope or a bullet, whichever is more convenient." Jacob's mind raced. A brother. The woman was looking for her brother, and Drake had just admitted, however casually, that someone might have lied to her. "I'll keep my eyes open," Jacob said flatly. Drake nodded, touched the brim of his hat in a mocking salute, and turned his horse. But before he rode away, he looked back at Jacob's cabin one more time, his eyes lingering on the closed door on the dark windows. "You know, Mr. Mercer," Drake called out, "some ghosts don't stay buried. You'd do well to remember that." Then he rode away, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust that hung in the morning air. Jacob waited until Drake was completely out of sight before he moved from the window. His heart was pounding. Drake knew his name. Drake knew about his family. And Drake was lying about something Jacob was certain of it. He turned back to the woman on the floor. She had not moved during the exchange, but her eyes were open now, staring at him with an intensity that froze him in place. They looked at each other for a long moment. Jacob slowly lowered the rifle, setting it aside. The woman's eyes tracked the movement, wary, but not hostile. "You heard that?" Jacob asked, though he expected no answer. To his surprise, she spoke. Her voice was rough, her English heavily accented and broken, but understandable. "He lies." Jacob's eyebrows rose. "You speak English?" "Little." She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. Sweat beaded on her forehead. "My brother, Nietzsche, they took him 6 moons ago." 6 months. Jacob did his own quick calculation. Fort Bowie had been involved in several raids on Apache camps during that time. It was entirely possible they had taken children. "Drake said there were no children at the fort," Jacob said carefully. The woman's face twisted with something between rage and despair. "He lies," she repeated. "I saw soldiers take Nietzsche. I tried to stop them. They shot me, left me." Her good hand moved to her broken leg, and she gritted her teeth against the pain. "When I healed, I went to fort. They captured me." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "They burned me, asked where my people hid. I said nothing. Then they said Nietzsche was not there, never was there, told me I was crazy." She looked at Jacob with eyes that held too much pain, too much loss. "I did not believe them. I fought. I killed. I ran." And she had nearly died for it. Jacob sat down heavily on the floor across from her. "My name is Jacob. Jacob Mercer." She studied him for a long moment. "I am Dakota." "Dakota," Jacob repeated. The name felt strange on his tongue, but right somehow. "Your brother Nietzsche. You think he's still alive?" "He must be." There was no room for doubt in her voice, only iron certainty. "I will find him." "You'll die trying," Jacob said bluntly. "In case you hadn't noticed, you can barely move. Your leg is broken, your shoulder was dislocated, and you've lost enough blood to kill a smaller person." Dakota's jaw set in a stubborn line. "Then I die. But I do not stop." Jacob recognized that look. He had seen it in the mirror for 3 years, the look of someone who had already decided they had nothing left to lose. "Why did you save me?" Dakota asked suddenly. "I am Apache. You are white. We are enemies." Jacob was quiet for a long time. Outside, the morning sun continued to rise, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. "Because I've already left too many people behind in my life," he finally said. "I couldn't save my wife, couldn't save my son. They died right here in this cabin, and all my medical knowledge meant nothing. I held their hands and watched them fade, and I've been half dead myself ever since." He looked at Dakota, really looked at her. "When I found you out there dying in the dust, something in me couldn't walk away. Maybe I thought if I saved you, it would make up for the ones I couldn't save. Maybe I'm just tired of being alone with my ghosts." Dakota was silent, absorbing his words. Then she said very quietly, "The soldier called me monster." "Drake's an ass," Jacob said flatly. Despite her pain, despite everything, Dakota's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You are a strange white man," she said. "You're a strange patient," Jacob countered. "Most people don't try to punch me when I'm stitching them up." This time Dakota did smile just a little. It transformed her face, softening the hard edges, making her look younger, almost vulnerable. "Rest," Jacob said, standing. "You need to heal before you can even think about finding your brother. And you will let me stay." There was surprise in her voice and something else, hope maybe. Jacob thought about Drake's cold eyes, about the lie he had told so easily. He thought about Nietzsche, a 7-year-old boy lost somewhere in the machinery of the Army's Apache campaign. He thought about the star-shaped burn on Dakota's wrist. "Yeah," he said, "you can stay, at least until you can walk again. And then," Jacob met her gaze, "and then we'll figure out what happened to your brother." Dakota stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for deception and finding none. Slowly she nodded. The rest of that first day passed in a haze of heat and silence. Jacob moved about the cabin, doing the small chores that kept his ranch functioning. He fed patients, checked the fence line that Drake's horse had disturbed, and tried not to think too hard about the unconscious Apache warrior currently occupying his floor. By evening, Dakota woke again. Jacob brought her water, which she drank greedily, and a bowl of thin stew made from dried meat and vegetables. She ate slowly, her movements careful and pained. "You are doctor?" she asked between bites. "Was," Jacob corrected. "During the war. After my family died, I put it all away, didn't want to touch it again." "Why?" Jacob set down his own bowl. "Because every time I looked at those tools, I thought about how useless they were when it mattered most." Dakota nodded slowly. "I understand." They ate in silence after that. When darkness fell, Jacob built up the fire in the hearth and laid out a bedroll for himself near the door. Dakota remained on the floor where he had left her, too injured to move to the bed. Sometime in the night, Jacob woke to the sound of movement. He sat up quickly, reaching for the rifle, and saw Dakota trying to drag herself toward the door. She was using her good arm to pull her body forward, her broken leg trailing behind her, leaving a smear of blood on the wooden planks. "What are you doing?" Jacob demanded, scrambling to his feet. Dakota did not answer. She kept moving, her face contorted with effort and pain. She reached the door frame and pulled herself up onto her good leg, swaying dangerously. "You can't go out there," Jacob said, moving toward her. "You'll kill yourself." "Better than dying here," Dakota gasped. "Better than being trapped." She tried to push the door open, but her strength failed. Jacob caught her as she fell, her weight nearly taking them both down. Instead of fighting him this time, she simply sagged in his arms, defeated. Jacob helped her back inside, but instead of laying her down again, he helped her out onto the small porch. They sat together on the weathered boards, the night air cool against their skin. The Arizona sky stretched above them, filled with more stars than seemed possible. The Milky Way was a river of light cutting across the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Dakota spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "When they took Nietzsche, he was crying for me. He called my name. I could hear him even after they rode away." Her voice broke. "He was so small, so afraid." Jacob said nothing. Sometimes there were no words that could touch that kind of pain. "I am his guardian," Dakota continued. "Our mother died when he was born. Our father was killed by soldiers 2 summers ago. I raised Nietzsche. I taught him to ride, to hunt, to be brave. And then I failed him." "You didn't fail him," Jacob said quietly. "They shot you, left you for dead. You did everything you could. It was not enough." Jacob thought about Sarah's final hours, about how he had sat beside her bed and listened to her labored breathing, knowing there was nothing he could do. He thought about Thomas, so small and frail in those last days, asking when he would feel better. "It never is," he said. "But that doesn't mean we stop trying." Dakota turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting starlight. "You will truly help me find him." Jacob nodded. "If your brother is alive, we'll find him. But we have to be smart about it. We can't just charge into Fort Bowie. They'll kill us both." "Then what do we do? First you heal, then we start asking questions, quietly. I have friends, other former Army medics, doctors at other forts. Someone will know something about where they take Apache children." Dakota was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out with her good hand and placed it on Jacob's shoulder. The gesture was awkward, unpracticed, as if she was not used to showing gratitude or trust. "Thank you," she said simply. Jacob felt something shift in his chest, some long frozen part of himself beginning to thaw. For the first time in 3 years, he felt like he had a purpose beyond simply surviving each day. "Come on," he said, standing and offering his hand. "Let's get you back inside before you freeze." This time Dakota took his hand without hesitation. Over the next week, a routine developed. Each morning, Jacob would change Dakota's bandages and check her wounds for infection. He made her drink willow bark tea for the pain, though she complained it tasted like dirt. He brought her food, water, and told her stories about his life before the war, before the ranch, when he had been young and foolish and full of dreams. In return, Dakota taught him words in Apache. She told him about her people, about the sacred mountains, and the old ways that were being destroyed piece by piece. She spoke of Nietzsche with a tenderness that seemed at odds with her fierce exterior, describing how he loved to catch lizards and how he laughed at everything. On the third day, Jacob helped her outside to practice putting weight on her injured leg. She leaned heavily on a crutch he had made from a strong branch, her face pale with effort. But she did not complain. She simply gritted her teeth and took one step, then another. "You're stubborn as a mule," Jacob observed. "Mules are smart," Dakota countered. "They know when to kick." Despite himself, Jacob laughed. It was a rusty sound, unused for so long it felt foreign. On the 5th day, a scrawny wolf appeared near the chicken coop just after dawn. Jacob grabbed his rifle, but before he could aim, Dakota had already seized the wooden crutch and hobbled outside with surprising speed. The wolf turned toward her, lips curling back from yellow teeth. Dakota did not hesitate. She swung the crutch like a club, the wood connecting with the wolf's skull with a crack that echoed across the yard. The animal dropped, twitched once, and lay still. Jacob stood in the doorway, rifle forgotten in his hands, staring at her in disbelief. Dakota turned, breathing hard, and met his gaze. "Chicken is not for wolf," she said matter-of-factly. Then her leg gave out, and she collapsed. Jacob rushed forward and caught her before she hit the ground. She was heavy, solid, but he managed to lower her gently to the dirt. "You're insane," he said, half laughing, half horrified. "You know that—" Dakota looked up at him, her face inches from his own. "You are weak," she said, but there was no malice in it, almost a teasing quality. It was the first time Jacob had held someone close since Sarah died. The first time he had felt the weight of another person depending on him, trusting him. It should have hurt, should have reminded him of all he had lost. Instead, it felt like coming back to life. "Come on, warrior," he said softly. "Let's get you inside before you decide to wrestle a bear." That night, as they sat by the fire, Dakota spoke more freely than she had before. She told Jacob about the night Nietzsche was taken, how the soldiers had come just before dawn, how she had fought 3 of them before a bullet took her down. "I woke up 3 days later," she said, staring into the flames. "My people had moved on. They thought I was dead. I tracked the soldiers to Fort Bowie. Took me 2 months. And when you got there—" Dakota's face hardened. "They were waiting, like they knew I would come. They put me in chains, burned me to make me talk." She touched the star-shaped scar on her wrist. "When I would not break, Captain Drake came. He told me Nietzsche was never there, that I was mad with grief, that I had imagined the whole thing. But you didn't believe him." No, because I am not mad. I saw soldiers take my brother. I heard him call for me. Jacob nodded slowly. Drake is hiding something. I'm sure of it now. What will we do? I'm going to write to an old friend, Jacob said. Dr. Samuel Hartwell. He's stationed at Fort Union in New Mexico. If there's a program or policy about Apache children, he'll know about it. He'll tell me the truth. Dakota looked at him with something like wonder in her eyes. You would do this, risk yourself for an Apache child you have never met. Jacob met her gaze. I'm doing it for you, because for the first time in 3 years, I feel like I'm actually living again instead of just waiting to die. The words hung in the air between them. Dakota reached out and took Jacob's hand in her larger, calloused one. She said nothing, but she did not need to. The gesture said everything. They sat like that for a long time, two broken people beginning to heal each other, while outside the desert night stretched on forever. And the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, witness to this small moment of grace in a harsh and unforgiving world. 2 weeks passed like water through cupped hands. The Arizona sun rose and set with indifferent regularity, scorching the earth by day and abandoning it to cold darkness by night. In his small cabin, Jacob Mercer watched Dakota heal with a mixture of professional satisfaction and something deeper, something he was not yet ready to name. She was a remarkable patient in the worst possible way, stubborn, driven, refusing to acknowledge pain or limitation. Each morning she insisted on walking farther, pushing her broken leg beyond what Jacob considered safe. He would argue she would ignore him, and they would compromise on a distance that still made him nervous. On the 16th day after her arrival, Jacob woke before dawn to find her already outside practicing with a staff he had cut for her. She stood on her good leg, the injured one barely touching the ground, moving the staff through defensive patterns with her recovering arm. Her movements were slow and careful, nothing like the fluid violence he suspected she was capable of, but determined. He watched from the doorway, coffee cup warming his hands as the first light touched her face. Sweat already gleamed on her forehead despite the cool morning air. She repeated the same sequence over and over, her jaw set in concentration, making minute adjustments to her stance. "You should be resting," Jacob called out. Dakota did not stop moving. "Resting makes weak. Pushing too hard makes dead." She completed the sequence one more time before lowering the staff and turning to face him. Her breathing was labored but controlled. "When I was small, my father taught me. He said a warrior who stops training is already defeated." Jacob walked down from the porch, his boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. "Your father sounds like he would have gotten along with my old sergeant. Man thought sleep was a sign of moral weakness. Did you believe him?" "I learned to sleep standing up," Jacob said with a slight smile, which probably proves his point. Dakota's mouth quirked upward. Over the past 2 weeks, Jacob had learned to read her expressions. She smiled rarely, but when she did, it was genuine, transforming her scarred face into something almost gentle. They stood together in the growing light, the desert stretching around them in shades of rose and gold. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals invisible to human eyes. "Come," Dakota said, gesturing with the staff. "I show you something." She led him, limping but steady, to the eastern side of the property, where a cluster of barrel cacti grew. With her good hand, she broke off one of the pads, careful to avoid the spines, and used a flat rock to scrape away the outer skin. The flesh inside was pale green and moist. "When there is no water, this saves life," she explained. "My people have known this since the beginning time. You chew, spit out the pulp, keep the moisture." Jacob watched as she demonstrated her large hands working with surprising delicacy. "You're teaching me survival skills. You saved my life. Now I teach you how to save yours." She handed him a prepared piece of cactus. "The desert is not enemy. It provides if you know how to ask." Over the next hour, Dakota showed him which plants were edible, which could be used for medicine, how to read the ground for signs of water. Her knowledge was vast and practical, accumulated over a lifetime of living in harmony with this harsh land. "Your people think Apache are savages," she said at one point, her voice matter-of-fact rather than bitter. "But we know things your people have forgotten, how to live without destroying, how to take only what is needed." Jacob thought about the settlements pushing ever westward, the mines that scarred the mountains, the way the army cleared entire valleys of their original inhabitants. "I think you might be right about that." They walked back to the cabin together, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Jacob felt something like peace. Not happiness, not yet, but a quiet contentment in simply being present in this moment with this person. That afternoon, as Jacob was repairing a section of fence, he noticed Dakota watching him from the porch. Her expression was troubled, distant. "What's wrong?" he called out. She did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to move closer to hear. "I am afraid." Jacob set down his tools. In all their time together through pain and danger, he had never heard her admit fear. "Of what? That when we find Nietzsche he will not know me. That they will have taken everything that made him my brother and replaced it with something else." Her hands clenched into fists. "Or worse, that we will not find him at all, that he is already gone." Jacob climbed the porch steps and sat beside her. "Then we make sure that doesn't happen. We find him whatever it takes." "You say this like it is simple." "It's not simple. It's probably impossible. But we're going to do it anyway." Dakota turned to look at him, really look at him, as if seeing him for the first time. "Why do you care so much? You did not know me before. You do not know Nietzsche. We are nothing to you." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, watching the shadows lengthen across the yard. When he spoke, the words came from a place deep inside that he had kept locked away for 3 years. "After Sarah and Thomas died, I stopped caring about anything. I went through the motions of living, but I was already dead inside. Every morning I woke up disappointed that I had woken up at all. I wasn't brave enough to end it myself, so I just waited for something else to do it for me." He looked at his hands, calloused and scarred from years of work. "Then I found you dying in that canyon, and something in me refused to let you go. Maybe it was instinct from my years as a medic. Maybe it was guilt over the people I couldn't save. But when I brought you here and started taking care of you, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Like maybe I wasn't completely useless after all." Dakota's eyes glistened in the fading light. "You are not useless. I'm starting to believe that again, because of you." He met her gaze. "So when I say I'll help you find Nietzsche, it's not charity. It's not pity. It's because helping you has given me a reason to be alive again. You've saved me as much as I saved you." They sat in silence as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire. Then Dakota did something that surprised them both. She leaned her head against Jacob's shoulder, her weight settling against him with a trust that felt more intimate than any words. "Thank you," she whispered. Jacob put his arm around her broad shoulders, feeling the solidity of her, the warmth of another living being who understood loss and pain, and the slow, difficult work of healing. They sat like that until the stars emerged, neither one wanting to move, neither one wanting to break this fragile moment of grace. That night Jacob could not sleep. He sat by the window rifle across his knees, watching the moonlit desert. Dakota was asleep on the floor near the fireplace, her breathing deep and even. The sound was oddly comforting, a reminder that he was not alone in the darkness. Around midnight he heard her cry out. He turned to see her thrashing in her sleep, words tumbling from her mouth in Apache. Her face was contorted in anguish, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool night air. Jacob set the rifle aside and moved to her side. He had seen this before during the war, soldiers reliving battles in their dreams. He knew better than to touch her while she was in the grip of the nightmare. "Dakota," he said quietly, "you're safe. You're at the cabin. It's just a dream." She did not wake. Her hands clenched into fists, and she screamed something that sounded like a name. "Nietzsche." Jacob made a decision. He reached out and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "Dakota, come back." Her eyes flew open, and her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with crushing force. For a moment he saw no recognition in her eyes, only the wild panic of someone still trapped in nightmare. Then focus returned. She saw him saw where she was, and her grip loosened. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice breaking, "you were dreaming." She sat up slowly, drawing her knees to her chest, despite the pain it must have caused her injured leg. In the firelight she looked younger, more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. "I dream of the day they took Naichi. I dream I am faster, stronger. I dream I save him. Then I wake up and remember I failed." Jacob sat beside her, close but not touching. "Tell me what happened, all of it." Dakota was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, distant, as if she was watching the events from far away. "It was early morning. The camp was just waking. Naichi was helping me prepare the fire. He was laughing because I had told him a story about Coyote the Trickster. He loved that story. Always wanted to hear it again and again." She closed her eyes, and a tear traced down her scarred cheek. "Then we heard horses, many horses. The soldiers came from 2 directions. They were shooting before we could even react. Women were screaming, children crying. I grabbed Naichi, tried to run to the canyon where we could hide." Her voice grew rougher. "A soldier caught us. Big man with a red beard and mean eyes. He hit me with his rifle butt, knocked me to the ground. I got back up, broke his nose with my elbow. He was screaming, bleeding everywhere. Then another soldier shot me in the leg." Her hand moved to touch the scar on her thigh, fingers tracing the old wound. "I fell, could not stand. Naichi was screaming my name, trying to reach me. The red-bearded man, he was so angry. He grabbed Naichi by his hair, dragged him to a horse. My brother was fighting, biting, kicking, but he was so small, just 7 summers old." Dakota's entire body was shaking now. "I tried to crawl to him, tried to stand. My leg would not work. There was so much blood. The red-bearded soldier came back. He kicked me in the head. I remember the taste of dirt and blood. I remember Naichi screaming. Then nothing, just darkness." She opened her eyes and looked at Jacob. "When I woke up, 2 days had passed. My people had moved running from more soldiers. They thought I was dead, left me with the other bodies." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I was not dead, just broken." "Your people would have come back for you if they'd known," Jacob said quietly. "Maybe, maybe not. It does not matter now. I tracked the soldiers. It took me 6 weeks to heal enough to walk properly. Another month to follow their trail to Fort Bowie. I watched the fort for 3 days before I went in." She paused, her breathing heavy. "I saw children there. White children, Mexican children, even a few Apache children doing labor, but not Naichi. I thought maybe he was inside in the buildings where I could not see, so I walked through the gate and demanded to see my brother. That's when they arrested you. Yes, they laughed at me, called me a crazy squaw, put me in chains in a stone room with no windows. I was there for 2 days before Captain Drake came." Dakota's hand moved to the star-shaped burn on her wrist fingers, tracing each point of the scar. He was different from the other soldiers, quiet, cold. He looked at me like I was an interesting problem to solve, not a person. He said he would make a deal with me. If I told him where my people were camped, how many warriors we had, where we got our weapons, he would tell me where Naichi was. I told him to go to hell. Despite the grimness of the story, Jacob almost smiled at that. So he burned me, heated a piece of iron in a brazier until it glowed, pressed it to my wrist, held it there while I screamed. When he pulled it away, he asked again. I said nothing. He burned me again, 5 times 1 for each point of the star. Jacob felt sick. The casual cruelty of it, the deliberate torture of a woman looking for her brother. Between each burn, he asked his questions. Between each burn, I said nothing. Finally, he smiled. It was worse than the burning, that smile. He said Naichi had never been at Fort Bowie, that the soldiers who raided my camp had taken him somewhere else. He said I was chasing shadows, that I should forget my brother and go back to my people. But you didn't believe him. No, because I am not stupid. If Nietzsche had never been at Fort Bowie, why did Drake care so much about where my people were? Why torture me for information if I was just a crazy woman chasing nothing? Her eyes blazed with anger. He was lying. I knew it then. I know it now. So you escaped? Yes. They moved me to a different cell the next day. Smaller, one guard. He was young, nervous. When he brought food, I pretended to be weaker than I was. When he came close, I grabbed his head and broke his neck. She said it without emotion, simply stating a fact. I took his keys, his gun, found the armory. 6 soldiers came. I killed them all, then I ran. I had no plan, no supplies. I just ran until I could not run any more. That is when you found me. They sat in silence for a long time. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, a coyote called to the moon. "You're not crazy," Jacob said finally, "and you're not a monster. You're a sister who would do anything to find her brother. There's nothing shameful in that." Dakota looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. Gratitude, maybe, or hope. "You truly believe we can find him?" "Yes, and I think I know how." Jacob stood and retrieved paper and pen from his desk. "I'm going to write to Dr. Hartwell again. He mentioned rumors about children disappearing from schools. I want him to ask around, be more specific. Someone has to know where these children go." He sat at the table and began writing by the light of the oil lamp. Dakota watched him work, and after a moment she pulled herself up and limped over to sit across from him. "Tell me about this doctor," she said. "Samuel Hartwell. We served together during the war. He was a surgeon, I was a field medic. We saved a lot of men together." Jacob paused in his writing. "He's a good man. If anyone can find out the truth about what happens to Apache children, it's him. And if the truth is something terrible," Jacob met her eyes, "then at least we'll know, and we can decide what to do about it." He finished the letter as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. It was longer than his first one, more urgent, asking specific questions about Indian boarding schools, about military involvement, about any irregularities in how children were processed and assigned. "Now we wait," Jacob said, sealing the envelope. "I am not good at waiting." I noticed. Despite the heaviness of the night's conversation, Dakota smiled slightly. "You are teaching me patience, Jacob Mercer. And you're teaching me how to live again, Dakota." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Fair trade, I think." The morning of the 18th day brought a visitor. Jacob was drawing water from the well when he heard the sound of hooves approaching from the east. He grabbed his rifle and called out to Dakota, who emerged from the cabin with her own weapon ready. But the rider who appeared was not a soldier or a bounty hunter. It was an old man on a tired mule, leading a pack animal laden with mail bags and supplies. He stopped at the fence line and raised one hand in a peaceful gesture. "Jacob Mercer," the man called out. "Who's asking?" "Name's Ezra Walsh. I carry mail and packages between settlements. Got something here for you from New Mexico Territory." Jacob's heart jumped. Dr. Hartwell's reply. It had only been a week since he sent the second letter, which meant his old friend had responded quickly, understanding the urgency. He walked to the fence, aware of Dakota watching from the porch. "I'll take it." Ezra reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with wax. But his eyes had drifted past Jacob to where Dakota stood, and his expression had gone carefully neutral. "That there an Apache woman, Ezra?" asked, his voice mild, but his hand drifting toward the pistol at his hip. "That's my business," Jacob said flatly, taking the envelope. Ezra studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Just be careful, Mr. Mercer. There's been talk in the settlements. Captain Drake's men are showing sketches around offering rewards. They're looking for a big Apache woman who escaped from Fort Bowie. Killed some soldiers, they say." "A lot of Apache in this territory," Jacob said. "Not many built like that one." Ezra gestured toward Dakota with his chin. "And fewer still who'd be living peaceable with a white settler. People are curious. Curiosity brings attention. Attention brings trouble." Jacob felt the weight of the envelope in his hands. "Are you going to report what you've seen here?" Ezra was quiet for a moment. his weathered face thoughtful. My job is delivering mail and keeping my mouth shut about what I see in people's private business. I've been doing this work for 30 years by following that rule. He tipped his hat. But others might not feel the same. I'd watch myself if I were you. The old man turned his mule and rode away, leaving Jacob standing with the envelope clutched in his hand. He walked back to the cabin where Dakota waited, tension visible in every line of her body. "The letter," she said, "from your friend." Jacob broke the wax seal and unfolded several sheets of paper covered in neat, hurried handwriting. He read quickly at first, then slower, his expression darkening with each line. When he finished, he looked up at Dakota with eyes that held both anger and determination. "Read it to me," she said. Jacob sat down heavily on the porch step and began to read aloud. "Jacob, I received your letter and immediately began making inquiries. What I've learned disturbs me greatly. You asked about Apache children taken by the Army. The official policy is relocation to Indian boarding schools for education and assimilation. The closest such school to your area is St. Catherine's in New Mexico, run by Catholic sisters but funded and overseen by the Army." He paused, then continued. "The stated goal of these schools is to, quote, civilize the savage, to, quote, kill the Indian and save the man. Children are forbidden to speak their native languages, practice their religions, or maintain any connection to their tribal identity. Their hair is cut, their names are changed, and they are punished severely for any resistance." Dakota's hands clenched into fists, but she said nothing. "But here's what concerns me most," Jacob continued reading. "I spoke with a colleague who worked briefly at St. Catherine's. He said that some children who arrive at the school don't stay there. They disappear from the records after a few weeks or months. When he asked about this, he was told the children had been adopted by Christian families or transferred to other facilities, but there were no transfer papers, no adoption records, nothing official." Jacob's voice grew tight with anger. He said one of the nuns told him in confidence that certain children were being selected by Army officers for something else. She didn't know what, but she suspected it wasn't legal. When she tried to investigate further, she was reassigned to a different mission. He looked at the final paragraph. "Jacob, I don't know what's happening to these children, but something is very wrong. If you're involved in this, somehow be careful. There are powerful people who benefit from the current system, and they won't take kindly to anyone asking difficult questions. If you need help, send word. I'll do what I can. Your friend Samuel." The letter fell silent. Dakota stood perfectly still, her face a mask of controlled fury. They steal children, erase who they are, and then some disappear completely. That's what it sounds like. Nietzsche could be one of those children, the ones who disappeared. Jacob folded the letter carefully. Or he could still be at St. Catherine's. We don't know yet, but now we know where to start looking. Then we go there, now. "Dakota, your leg. I do not care about my leg." Her voice cracked like a whip. "My brother is out there being erased or worse, and I am sitting here healing while he suffers. We leave tomorrow." Jacob stood and moved to face her. "Listen to me. If we go rushing in there without a plan, we'll accomplish nothing except getting ourselves killed or arrested. We need to be smart about this." "Then be smart quickly, because I cannot wait much longer." Jacob thought for a moment, his mind working through possibilities. "We need a reason to be at St. Catherine's, a legitimate reason that won't raise suspicion." "What reason?" "I don't know yet. Let me think." He paced the porch, his boots making soft thuds on the wooden planks. "A doctor, that's it. I'm a doctor making a routine health inspection of the children. It's the kind of thing that happens occasionally at these facilities. And me, you'll be—" Jacob paused. "This is the hard part. You can't go as yourself. They'll recognize you immediately." Dakota's jaw set in a stubborn line. "I will not stay here while you go. I'm not asking you to. But we need to disguise who you are. Make you look like something other than an escaped Apache warrior." "How?" Jacob studied her, thinking. "Different clothes. A veil, maybe like some widows wear. We could say you're my assistant, a woman who doesn't speak because of some trauma. People won't question it too hard if we seem legitimate. You think this will work? It has to work. It's the only way we're getting inside that school without guns blazing." Dakota was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the idea of hiding, of pretending to be something she was not. Finally, she nodded. "I will do whatever is necessary to find Naichi, even if it means pretending to be weak and silent." "You could never be weak," Jacob said. "But silent might be a challenge." Despite everything, she almost smiled. They spent the rest of the day making preparations. Jacob wrote a careful letter introducing himself as Dr. Jacob Mercer, formerly of the Union Army Medical Corps, requesting permission to visit St. Catherine's to conduct a health assessment of the children. He kept the language formal and official, the kind of bureaucratic correspondence that would not raise immediate suspicion. Meanwhile, Dakota worked on building her strength. She walked circuits around the property, forcing her injured leg to bear more weight, gritting her teeth against the pain. By evening she could manage 100 yards without the crutch, though her limp was still pronounced. "It will have to be enough," she said, breathing hard. "You're healing faster than any patient I've ever had. I am motivated." As the sun set, they sat together on the porch sharing a simple meal of beans and cornbread. The desert stretched before them peaceful in the fading light, giving no hint of the violence that had happened here or the dangers that lay ahead. "Jacob," Dakota's voice was soft. "What will you do after we find Naichi? Will you come back here to your ghosts?" Jacob thought about the question. A month ago the answer would have been simple. This cabin, this lonely existence, was all he had. But now, sitting beside this fierce, complicated woman who had somehow become the center of his world, the future looked different. "I don't know," he said honestly. "This place has been my prison as much as my home. Maybe it's time to leave the ghosts behind." "Where would you go?" "Wherever you and Naichi go, if you'll have me." Dakota turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting the last light of day. "You would do this, leave your home to travel with Apache. You're not just Apache to me anymore. You're—" He struggled to find the right words. "You're the person who made me want to live again. Where you go, I go. If you'll let me." She reached out and took his hand, her grip strong and warm. "Then we go together, all three of us. We will be family." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Family. Not by blood, but by choice. By shared pain and shared healing. "Yeah," Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. "Family." They sat like that as darkness fell, two people planning a dangerous journey to save a child they both loved for different reasons, united by a bond that neither quite understood but both trusted completely. 3 days later, trouble found them in force. Jacob was in the shed behind the cabin checking their supplies and making lists of what they would need for the journey to New Mexico when Dakota's voice cut through the afternoon heat, sharp and urgent. "Jacob Ryder's many." He grabbed the Winchester and ran to the front of the cabin. Dakota stood on the porch balanced without her crutch, now pointing toward the southern approach. A group of riders came toward them, at least 8 men, spread out in a loose formation. In the lead rode a familiar figure in dusty trail clothes. Silas Cormac had returned, and he had brought friends. The bounty hunters stopped just outside rifle range and sat their horses in a ragged line. Silas nudged his mount forward a few steps, a smile on his weathered face that held no warmth. "Afternoon, Mercer," he called out. "Nice day, isn't it?" Jacob said, nothing the rifle steady in his hands. "See, we had us a talk after we left here last time," Silas continued, his voice carrying across the distance. "And we decided you were hiding something, so we asked around in the settlements. Asked about you. Seems you lost your family a while back. Seems you've been living out here alone, not bothering nobody. Then suddenly you're threatening honest working men who just want to collect a legitimate bounty." "Get to the point," Jacob said. Silas's smile widened. "The point is, we know you got that Apache woman, and we're not leaving without her. Now you can hand her over peaceful and we'll let you live. Or we can take her by force and burn this place to the ground with you in it. Your choice." Jacob felt Dakota tense beside him. He could sense her readiness to fight the coiled violence in her despite her injuries. "Third option," Jacob said. "You turn around right now, and maybe I let you live." The bounty hunters laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the empty land. "There's 8 of us and 2 of you," one of them called out, "and one of you is a crippled squaw. You really want to make this hard?" Before Jacob could respond, Dakota stepped forward. She stood at her full height, imposing even with her limp, and when she spoke, her voice carried clear and strong. "I am Dakota, daughter of Grey Wolf's sister, Tunaichi. I have killed 6 soldiers. I can kill 8 cowards." She paused. "Come and try to take me. See what happens." The bounty hunters shifted uneasily in their saddles. Facing a woman who openly challenged them to combat was clearly not what they had expected. Silas's smile faded. "Big talk for someone who can barely walk." "Then test me," Dakota said simply. For a moment Jacob thought Silas might actually back down. Then one of the other bounty hunters, the heavy-set man with the scarred forehead, raised his rifle. "Enough talking," he growled. "Let's just—" He never finished the sentence. Dakota's hand moved with shocking speed, snatching the revolver from Jacob's belt and firing in one smooth motion. The bullet caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him backward off his horse. Chaos erupted. The bounty hunters spurred their horses forward, rifles coming up. Jacob dropped to one knee and fired his shot, taking down one of the lead riders. Dakota fired again, missed, adjusted, and her third shot dropped a horse, sending its rider tumbling. "Inside!" Jacob shouted, grabbing Dakota's arm. They ran for the cabin, bullets kicking up dust around their feet. Jacob felt something hot graze his left arm, but kept moving. They crashed through the door, and Jacob slammed it shut, dropping the heavy wooden bar across it. "The windows," he said, moving to the one facing south. Dakota took the eastern window, using the frame for cover as she returned fire. The bounty hunters had scattered, using whatever cover they could find. 3 were down, dead or wounded, but 5 remained, and they were spreading out to surround the cabin. Jacob aimed carefully and fired. One of the attackers dropped behind a water trough unhurt, but pinned down. Dakota fired twice, forcing 2 more to retreat behind an overturned wagon Jacob had left in the yard months ago. "We cannot stay here," Dakota said, reloading with quick, practiced movements. "They will set fire to the cabin." She was right. Jacob could already see one of the bounty hunters circling around with what looked like a torch. "We need to break through before they get us surrounded." "Where?" Jacob thought quickly. "The back window. There's cover in the rocks about 50 yards behind the cabin. If we can reach those, we can make it to the canyon." "Your shoulder is bleeding." Jacob glanced down. The graze was worse than he thought, blood soaking his shirt. "I'll be fine. Can you run?" "I will run or I will die. Either way, I do not stay here." They moved to the back of the cabin. Jacob checked the window, saw no one immediately visible, and smashed out the remaining glass with his rifle butt. "On 3, he said. 1, 2, 3. He went through first, hit the ground, rolling, came up with his rifle ready. Dakota followed her, landing heavier but controlled. They ran for the rocks, Jacob's wounded shoulder screaming in protest, Dakota's limp making her gait uneven but determined. Behind them, shouts of alarm. The bounty hunters had realized their prey was escaping. Bullets whined past chipping stone as Jacob and Dakota dove behind the rocks. "Keep moving," Jacob gasped. "The canyon is just ahead." They scrambled through the rocks, using every bit of cover. Jacob could hear the bounty hunters pursuing their curses and the clatter of their boots on stone. He stopped, braced his rifle, and fired twice, forcing them to slow down. Then they were at the canyon's edge, the ground dropping away into shadows and twisted rock. The same place Jacob had found Dakota 3 weeks ago, though it felt like a lifetime. "Down there," Dakota said, pointing to a narrow path. "I can make it." "You sure?" "No, but we have no choice." They started down, half climbing, half sliding on the loose stone. Jacob's shoulder was on fire now, his vision swimming slightly from blood loss. Above them, the bounty hunters appeared at the canyon rim. A rifle cracked and rock exploded inches from Jacob's head. He lost his footing, started to fall, and Dakota's hand shot out, grabbing his belt and hauling him against the canyon wall. "Keep moving," she said, her voice steady, despite her own labored breathing. They descended deeper into the canyon, into shadows where the afternoon sun did not reach. The bounty hunters were following, but the narrow path and poor light made shooting difficult. At the bottom, the canyon floor was a maze of boulders and twisted juniper trees. Jacob led the way through the maze, his military training coming back. Zigzag pattern, never move in a straight line, use every scrap of cover. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit faded slightly. The bounty hunters were having trouble with the terrain. They ran until Jacob's lungs burned and his legs felt like water. Finally, he collapsed behind a large boulder, Dakota dropping beside him. They sat in silence, except for their ragged breathing, listening for sounds of pursuit. "Your shoulder," Dakota said after a moment. Jacob looked down. His entire left side was soaked with blood. "It's worse than I thought." Without a word, Dakota tore a strip from her own shirt and wrapped it tightly around his shoulder, her large hands surprisingly gentle. "This will slow the bleeding, but you need proper care soon." "Add it to the list," Jacob said with a weak smile. They heard voices above them, the bounty hunters arguing about which way their quarry had gone. Jacob held his breath, his good hand tight on his rifle. Then cutting through the late afternoon air came a new sound, hoofbeats, many of them, and the jingle of military tack. Dakota tensed. "Cavalry." They heard Silas's voice, suddenly nervous. "Who's that? We got business here, this ain't army." Then another voice, cold and precise, carrying easily in the still air. "Captain Ellis Drake. This area is under military jurisdiction. Whatever business you have here is finished. Clear out." "Now hold on," Silas protested. "We got a legitimate bounty. I said clear out." Drake's voice held iron authority. "Unless you want to be arrested for interfering with an official army operation." There was grumbling, but the bounty hunters were clearly backing down. The sound of their horses moving away echoed through the canyon. Then silence. Jacob and Dakota waited, not moving, barely breathing. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only minutes, they heard Drake's voice again, this time directed down into the canyon. "Mr. Mercer, I know you're down there, and I know the Apache woman is with you. I'm not here to arrest anyone or start a fight. I have a proposition for you, one that might benefit us both." Jacob exchanged a glance with Dakota. Her expression was one of deep suspicion. "Come up where we can talk like civilized people," Drake continued. "I give you my word as an officer that you'll both be safe. For today at least." "It's a trap," Dakota whispered. "Probably," Jacob agreed. But his shoulder was bleeding badly, night would fall soon, and they were trapped in this canyon with limited options. "But I want to hear what he has to say." "Jacob, if it's a trap, we'll deal with it. But if he wanted us dead, he could just send his men down here right now." He stood wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "Stay here. If anything goes wrong, run. Don't try to save me. I will not leave you." "Dakota, I will not leave you," she repeated, her voice allowing no argument. Jacob sighed. "Then stay behind me and keep your gun ready." They climbed back up the narrow path, moving slowly, every sense alert for danger. When they reached the canyon rim, they found Captain Drake sitting his horse alone, his men arranged in a loose semicircle behind him, but with their weapons holstered. The bounty hunters were nowhere to be seen. Drake looked down at them, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Mercer, you're bleeding." "I've had worse. I'm sure you have." Drake's eyes shifted to Dakota. "And you, the woman who killed 6 of my men. You're taller than I expected." Dakota said nothing, but her hand tightened on her revolver. "I'm not here for revenge," Drake said, "or justice. I'm here to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" Jacob asked, his voice flat. Drake leaned forward in his saddle. "I need to find a group of Apache resistance fighters. They've been raiding supply convoys, ambushing patrols, making my life very difficult. I have orders to eliminate them, but they know the territory too well. Every time we get close, they vanish like smoke." And, and I think she can help me find them. Drake gestured toward Dakota. Apache knows Apache. You could track them, predict their movements, lead my men to them. Why would I help you kill my people? Dakota's voice was low and dangerous. Drake smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Because if you do, I'll give you something you want. Freedom, official pardon for the Fort Bowie incident, a chance to walk away clean. You lie. Perhaps. But consider this. Right now you're a wanted fugitive. Every bounty hunter in the territory is looking for you. The army wants you dead or in chains. How long can you run before someone catches you? A month, a week. He paused. But if you help me, all of that goes away. You'd be free to go wherever you want, do whatever you want. Jacob stepped forward. You're asking her to betray her own people. I'm asking her to make a choice. Help me eliminate a dozen warriors who are already doomed anyway, or spend the rest of her short life running and hiding. Drake's eyes were cold. It's a practical decision, nothing personal. There is a third option, Dakota said quietly. Oh, I kill you here and now and take my chances. For the first time, something like respect flickered in Drake's eyes. You could try, but you'd never make it off this ridge alive. My men have orders to shoot if I fall. He straightened in his saddle. I'm giving you time to think about it. 3 days. Meet me at Devil's Peak at noon in 3 days if you accept my offer. If you don't show, I'll assume you've declined, and the hunt continues. He started to turn his horse, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Mercer, I know you've been asking questions about Apache children, about Indian schools. I'd advise you to stop. That's not a topic that will lead anywhere good for you. With that, he rode away, his men following in disciplined formation. The sound of hooves faded into the distance, leaving Jacob and Dakota standing alone on the canyon rim as the sun touched the western horizon. We cannot trust him, Dakota said finally. No, we can't. Jacob sat down heavily, his wounded shoulder throbbing. But he knows about Nietzsche. About us asking questions. That's not good. He is hiding something. Something about the children. Yeah. And I think whatever he's hiding is worse than what we've already learned. Jacob looked at her. We need to get to St. Catherine's before Drake figures out that's where we're going. If he realizes we're trying to find your brother, he'll stop us. Dakota knelt beside him, examining his shoulder in the fading light. This needs cleaning and stitching. We cannot travel with you like this. Then we go back to the cabin. Hope it's still standing after the fight. They made their way back through the canyon as darkness fell. The cabin was still there, scarred by bullet holes, but intact. The bounty hunters had taken or killed most of Jacob's chickens, and his fence was destroyed in places, but the structure itself had survived. Dakota cleaned and stitched Jacob's shoulder by lamplight, her hand steady despite the day's violence. The bullet had gouged a deep furrow but missed bone and major blood vessels. Painful, but not life-threatening if it didn't get infected. You did good work today, Jacob said as she bandaged the wound. I nearly got you killed. You saved my life, again. I'm starting to lose count. Dakota's mouth quirked slightly. Then we are even. You saved mine first. They sat together in the lamplight, exhausted and battered, but alive. Outside, the desert night settled in with its usual indifference to human drama. What do we do about Drake's offer? Dakota asked. We ignore it. Focus on finding Nietzsche. That's what matters. He will not let us ignore him. Probably not. Jacob stood carefully testing his shoulder. But we have 3 days before he expects an answer. That's 3 days to get ready and leave for New Mexico. Can you travel in 3 days? I'll have to. We're out of time, Dakota. Drake knows we're asking about the children. He might warn St. Catherine's to be on guard. We need to move fast. Dakota nodded slowly. Then we prepare. And when you are ready, we go. They spent the next 2 days in frantic preparation. Jacob wrote a more urgent letter to St. Catherine's, claiming an immediate need to inspect conditions due to reports of illness. He forged official-looking documents on paper he had saved from his army days, creating the illusion of authorization. Meanwhile, Dakota practiced moving without her limp, forcing herself to walk naturally despite the pain. She also worked with the disguise Jacob had suggested, learning to move in the heavy dark dress and veil he had found in Sarah's old trunk. It pained him to see another woman wearing his dead wife's clothes, but Sarah would have understood. She had always helped those in need. On the third day, they loaded their remaining supplies onto 2 horses. Patience would carry Jacob, and they had traded for a larger, stronger horse that could handle Dakota's weight. They would ride east first, then north, staying off main trails as much as possible. As they prepared to leave, Jacob took one last look at the cabin that had been his home and his prison for 3 years, the place where Sarah and Thomas had died, the place where he had nearly died himself, not from disease, but from grief and purposelessness. "Are you sad to leave?" Dakota asked, watching him. "No," Jacob said, and realized it was true. "I'm ready to go. This place belongs to ghosts. I belong with the living now." He turned to look at her, this fierce, damaged woman who had crashed into his life and changed everything. "I belong with you." Dakota met his gaze, and in her dark eyes he saw understanding, gratitude, and something deeper. Something neither of them had words for yet, but both recognized. "Then let us go find my brother," she said, "and then we will see what comes after." They mounted their horses and rode away from the cabin as the sun climbed into a cloudless sky. Behind them, the small structure grew smaller and smaller until it was just another speck in the vast Arizona landscape. Ahead of them lay 100 miles of dangerous territory, a school where children were having their identities erased, and a 7-year-old boy who might not even remember his sister's name. But for the first time in years, Jacob Mercer felt truly alive. He had a purpose. He had someone to protect. He had, against all odds and logic, hope. And beside him rode Dakota's sister and warrior, broken and healing, heading toward an uncertain future with a determination that could not be broken by bullets or betrayal or the weight of the world. Together they rode toward whatever came next, 2 survivors who had saved each other and now sought to save one more. The desert stretched before them, endless and unforgiving, but they did not ride alone. They rode as family, bound not by blood but by choice, by shared pain and shared purpose. And somewhere ahead, in a place called Saint, Catherine's a little boy named Naichi waited, not knowing that his sister had never stopped looking for him and that she was bringing an unlikely ally who would fight just as hard to bring him home. The sun climbed higher, the miles passed beneath the horses' hooves, and the second act of their story came to a close, the ending uncertain, but the path forward clear. Find the boy, save the boy, become whole again. Everything else was just details. The journey to New Mexico took 6 days of hard riding through country that seemed determined to kill them. The Arizona Territory gave way gradually to high desert plains, then to rolling hills covered in pinon and juniper. They traveled mostly at night, sleeping in hidden camps during the day, avoiding settlements and army patrols alike. Jacob's shoulder healed slowly, the wound closing, but leaving him weakened. Dakota watched him carefully, rationing their water and food, finding game where Jacob would have seen nothing. She moved with increasing ease, her leg growing stronger each day, though she still favored it slightly when she thought he wasn't looking. They spoke little during those days, conserving energy for the journey. But the silence between them was comfortable, the silence of 2 people who understood each other beyond words. On the morning of the 7th day, they crested a ridge and saw Saint. Catherine's Indian boarding school spread out in the valley below. It was larger than Jacob had expected. A cluster of adobe buildings arranged around a central courtyard surrounded by a low stone wall that was more symbolic than defensive. A chapel with a small bell tower stood at the north end, its white walls gleaming in the morning sun. Beyond the main buildings were smaller structures, dormitories perhaps, and beyond those fields where children could be seen working even at this early hour. "There," Dakota breathed, her voice tight with emotion. Nietzsche is there. I can feel it. Jacob studied the layout with a tactical eye. 2 entrances, one main gate facing east, another smaller gate on the western side. Guards at neither, just what looked like a porter's station near the main entrance. The place had the appearance of a school, not a prison, but Jacob knew appearances could be deceiving. "We go in as planned," he said. "I'm Dr. Mercer, conducting a routine health inspection. You're my assistant, a woman who doesn't speak due to trauma. We stay calm, ask to see the children's quarters, look for Nietzsche. And when we find him, we improvise." Jacob turned to look at her. The heavy black dress and veil transformed her appearance completely. From a distance, she looked like any morning woman of the frontier. Only up close could you see the fierce intelligence in her dark eyes, the warrior's bearing that no amount of disguise could truly hide. "Ready." Dakota adjusted her veil, her hands steady, despite what Jacob knew must be tremendous tension. "I have waited 6 months for this moment. I am ready." They rode down the ridge and approached the main gate. As they drew closer, Jacob could hear children's voices, high and thin, reciting something in unison. The sound made his skin crawl. It reminded him too much of military drills, of breaking spirits to create obedience. A nun emerged from the porter's station as they approached. She was perhaps 40, with a kind face weathered by sun and wind, wearing the black and white habit of her order. Her eyes took in Jacob's travel-stained clothes and Dakota's veiled figure with practiced assessment. "Good morning," Jacob said, dismounting carefully to favor his healing shoulder. "I'm Dr. Jacob Mercer. I wrote ahead about conducting a health inspection of the children." The nun's expression became guarded. "Dr. Mercer, yes, we received your letter only yesterday. Mother Superior was expecting more notice. I apologize for the short time frame. There have been reports of respiratory illness in several territorial schools. The Army has asked me to conduct rapid assessments to prevent any outbreaks." Jacob kept his voice professional, authoritative. "This is my assistant, Mrs. Black. She's a trained nurse but doesn't speak. A tragedy some years ago." The nun's expression softened as she looked at Dakota. "I'm Sister Agnes. Please come inside. I'll take you to Mother Superior." They were led through the main gate into the courtyard. Up close, the school was even more disturbing. Children of various tribes, all dressed in identical gray uniforms, moved in orderly lines between buildings. Their hair was cut short in the white style, their faces expressionless. None of them spoke or made eye contact with the visitors. Jacob felt Dakota's tension through the hand she briefly touched to his arm. Somewhere in this place was her brother transformed into one of these silent, obedient ghosts. Sister Agnes led them to the main building and into a sparse office where an elderly nun sat behind a heavy wooden desk. Mother Superior Maria was perhaps 70, her face lined but her eyes sharp and assessing. "Dr. Mercer," she said, not rising, "your letter mentioned concerns about respiratory illness." "Yes, Mother Superior. Several schools have reported cases of pneumonia and tuberculosis. The Army wants to ensure no outbreaks occur in their contracted facilities." "We've had no illness here." "I'm glad to hear it, but a proper examination of the children would confirm that and allow me to report back positively on conditions here." Jacob pulled out his forged authorization papers. "I have orders from the Territorial Medical Officer." Mother Superior studied the papers for a long moment. Jacob kept his breathing steady, his expression neutral. The documents were good forgeries, but they wouldn't stand up to detailed scrutiny. Finally, she nodded. "Very well. Sister Agnes will show you to the children's quarters. But understand, Dr. Mercer, these children are on a strict schedule. Any disruption could undo months of civilizing work." The casual cruelty of the statement delivered in such a matter-of-fact tone made Jacob's hands clench. Beside him, Dakota remained perfectly still, but he could sense the rage radiating from her. "I'll be as quick and unobtrusive as possible," Jacob said. Sister Agnes led them across the courtyard to one of the dormitory buildings. Inside, rows of narrow beds lined the walls, each made with military precision. The air smelled of lye soap and something else, something that reminded Jacob of the army hospitals during the war. Despair, maybe, or the slow death of hope. "The boys are in the fields now," Sister Agnes said. "The girls are at their domestic lessons. Would you like to begin with them?" "Yes, thank you." They were taken to a large room where perhaps 30 girls sat at long tables learning to sew. A stern-faced nun supervised them, rapping knuckles with a ruler whenever a stitch went wrong. The girls ranged in age from perhaps 5 to 15, all with the same short-cropped hair, the same gray uniforms, the same empty expressions. Jacob moved among them, making a show of checking eyes and throats, listening to breathing. Dakota followed, and he saw her studying each face with desperate intensity. None of them were Nietzsche, of course. He was in the boys' dormitory. But what struck Jacob was how the girls reacted to Dakota. Several of them stared at her veiled figure with something like recognition. One girl, perhaps 10 years old, whispered something in a language Jacob didn't understand. Apache, he realized. The supervising nun's ruler came down hard on the girl's hand. "English only, you know the rules." The girl's face went blank again, but her eyes followed Dakota as they left the room. "The boys are returning from the fields now," Sister Agnes said, checking a pocket watch. "You can examine them in the refectory before lunch." They were led to a long dining hall with bare wooden tables. Through the windows, Jacob could see a line of boys marching across the yard, hoes and rakes on their shoulders like rifles. They ranged in age from perhaps 6 to 16, all moving with the same mechanical precision. As they filed into the refectory and lined up for inspection, Jacob felt Dakota go rigid beside him. Her hand gripped his arm so tightly it hurt. "What is it?" he whispered. "There," she breathed. "Third row, small boy with the scar on his chin." Jacob looked. The boy was perhaps 7 small for his age, with delicate features and a small crescent-shaped scar on his chin. He stood at attention like all the others, staring straight ahead, his face blank. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. That is Nietzsche, my brother." Jacob's heart was pounding now. They had found him. After everything, they had actually found him. But looking at the boy's empty expression, his mechanical movements, Jacob understood. Dakota's deepest fear had been realized. Whatever Nietzsche had been these months at St. Catherine's had changed him fundamentally. "We proceed as planned," Jacob whispered. "Stay calm." He began the examinations, working his way down the line. As he drew closer to Nietzsche, he could see Dakota trembling beneath her veil. When he finally reached the boy, he knelt to be at eye level. "What's your name, son?" Jacob asked gently. "Peter." The boy's voice was flat, emotionless. "Peter Henderson." "Peter, that's a good name. Can you open your mouth for me? I need to check your throat." The boy obeyed mechanically. Jacob made a show of the examination, but his real attention was on Dakota, who had moved to stand directly in the boy's line of sight. "Peter," Jacob said quietly, "do you remember your life before you came here?" Something flickered in the boy's eyes. "No, sir. Sister Mary Catherine says I was a savage. Now I am civilized." "Do you remember your family?" The boy's expression remained blank, but Jacob saw his hands clench into small fists. "I have no family. The sisters are my family now." Dakota made a small sound, quickly suppressed. Jacob stood and moved to the next boy, giving her a moment to compose herself. They completed the examinations, Jacob's mind racing. Nietzsche was alive, but had been thoroughly indoctrinated. Worse, he showed no recognition of Dakota, no response to her presence. They had found him, but the boy his sister had known might already be gone. As the examination concluded, Sister Agnes approached. "Doctor, Mercer Mother Superior would like to speak with you before you leave. If you and Mrs. Black could return to her office." Jacob's instincts screamed warning. Something was wrong, but they had little choice. Of course. As they crossed the courtyard, Jacob noticed armed men near the main gate. Not soldiers, but they carried themselves like military. His hand drifted toward the revolver concealed under his coat. Mother Superior's office was no longer empty. Standing beside her desk was Captain Ellis Drake. "Dr. Mercer," Drake said, his voice cold and amused, "or should I say Mr. Mercer, since we both know you're not here on any official business." Jacob's hand moved to his gun, but Drake raised a hand. "I wouldn't. My men have rifles trained on every window and door. You'd be dead before you cleared leather." "How did you know we were coming here?" "I didn't know for certain, but when you didn't show up at Devil's Peak for our meeting, I suspected you might try something foolish." St. Catherine's was the logical place. Drake smiled. "You're looking for an Apache boy, the woman's brother, I presume." Dakota stood perfectly still, but Jacob could feel violence radiating from her like heat from a fire. "Here's what's going to happen," Drake continued. "You're both going to leave quietly, return to wherever you came from, and forget you ever heard of this place. If you do that, I'll let you live." "And if we don't," Jacob asked, "then you'll be arrested for trespassing on a federal facility, impersonating a government official, and a dozen other charges I can invent. The woman will hang for the soldiers she killed. Is that really what you want?" "You're hiding something," Jacob said. "Something about these children. That's why you don't want us here." Drake's expression didn't change. "I'm protecting a valuable program. These children are being saved from savagery given a chance at civilization. What happens to a few of them in the process is irrelevant." "What do you mean, what happens to them? That's not your concern." Dakota suddenly spoke, her voice low and dangerous despite the veil. "Where do the children go, the ones who disappear from the records?" For the first time, Drake looked genuinely surprised. "The woman speaks. How interesting." He studied her. "You've been doing research, asking questions. That was unwise." "Answer the question," Jacob said. Drake was quiet for a moment, clearly calculating. Then he shrugged. "Why not? You're not leaving here anyway, so what does it matter? Some of the children here are selected for special placement, families who want servants but don't want to deal with adult Indians. Ranchers who need workers they can control completely, even some brothels that cater to particular tastes." The casual evil of it, the matter-of-fact tone, made Jacob's vision go red. "You're selling children. I'm facilitating adoptions and employment opportunities, very lucrative ones." Drake smiled. "The government pays me to run this school. The buyers pay me to provide specific merchandise. Everyone benefits. Except the children. They're Indians. They were going to die anyway, either from disease or in the wars. This way, they serve a purpose." Drake's smile faded. "Now I've been generous in explaining this to you. Time to leave." "We're not leaving without the boy," Dakota said, her hand moving under her dress. "Then you're not leaving at all," Drake replied. He raised his voice. "Mr. Cormack, please escort our guests to the holding cells." Silas Cormack entered through the side door, a cruel smile on his face. Behind him were 3 more armed men. "Well, well," Silas drawled. "The doctor and his Apache horror. This is going to be fun." Everything happened at once. Dakota's hand emerged from under her dress, holding the revolver. She fired twice, dropping Silas and one of his men before they could react. Jacob drew his own gun and put a bullet through the window, shattering glass. "Run!" he shouted. They bolted for the door. Drake dove behind the desk. The remaining gunmen opened fire bullets, chewing into the doorframe. Jacob and Dakota burst into the courtyard and ran toward the main gate. Chaos erupted. Children scattered screaming. Nuns shouted in confusion. Drake's men poured from buildings, rifles ready. They weren't going to make it to the gate. There were too many armed men, too much open ground to cover. Then incredibly help came from an unexpected source. The young girl who had spoken Apache earlier suddenly stepped into the path of the pursuing gunmen. She shouted something in her native language, and other children joined her, forming a human barrier. The gunmen hesitated. They could shoot through the children, but even these hard men balked at massacring kids in cold blood. The Western Gate. Sister Agnes appeared beside Jacob, her face pale but determined. "Follow me." She led them at a run through the compound. Behind them, Drake was shouting orders, trying to organize pursuit without killing the children who were deliberately interfering. They reached the western gate. Sister Agnes fumbled with keys, her hands shaking. "I knew something was wrong here. I tried to tell the church, but no one would listen." The gate swung open. "Go. Find the authorities in Santa Fe. Tell them what's happening here." "Come with us," Jacob said. "I can't. These children need someone on the inside, someone who will remember their names, their real names, even if they forget themselves." She pressed something into Jacob's hand, a small leather journal. "This has records, names of children who disappeared where they were sent. Use it." Then she was gone, running back toward the chaos to help slow the pursuit. Jacob and Dakota ran for their horses, which they had left tied near the western wall. Bullets kicked up dust around them. Jacob returned fire blindly, just trying to slow the pursuers. They reached the horses and mounted. Dakota's horse, the bigger one, stumbled and nearly went down. Blood streamed from its flank where a bullet had creased it. "It won't carry me far," Dakota said. "Then we double up on patience." Jacob pulled his horse alongside hers. "Come on." Dakota slid from her wounded mount onto Patience behind Jacob. The old mare staggered under the combined weight but held firm. They kicked her into a gallop, racing for the hills beyond the school. Behind them, Drake's men were mounting up. A organized pursuit was forming. "We can't outrun them," Dakota said. "Not carrying double." She was right. Patience was strong, but not strong enough to outpace fresh horses while carrying two adults. "There," Jacob pointed to a rocky outcropping about a mile distant. "We make a stand there, better than being run down in the open." They pushed the horse hard, asking everything she had. Patience gave it her old heart-pounding foam flying from her mouth. They reached the rocks with perhaps 2 minutes to spare and dismounted, taking positions behind cover. 6 riders, Dakota counted, watching their pursuit. Drake and 5 others. Jacob checked his ammunition. 8 bullets left in his revolver. Not great odds. When have we had great odds, despite everything? Dakota almost smiled. The pursuers spread out as they approached, clearly planning to surround the rocks. Drake called out from a safe distance, "Mercer, give it up. You can't win this." "We don't have to win," Jacob shouted back. "We just have to survive long enough for word to spread about what you're doing here. No one will believe you. I'm a decorated army officer. You're a nobody and a murderer of soldiers." Drake's voice was supremely confident. "Last chance. Surrender now, and I'll make your deaths quick." Jacob looked at Dakota. Her veil had fallen away, revealing her face scarred and fierce and beautiful in the harsh sunlight. "Any regrets?" he asked. "Only that we did not get Naichi out. We'll find another way. If we survive. When we survive." She smiled at him, a true smile full of warmth and trust. "Then we survive together." The first shot rang out. The battle was joined. It was brutal and desperate. Drake's men tried to flank them, but the rocks provided good cover and narrow approaches. Jacob dropped one attacker who got too close. Dakota's shooting was deadly accurate despite her injured leg, forcing her into awkward positions. But they were running out of ammunition. Jacob was down to 3 bullets. Dakota had 4. Then reinforcements arrived, but not for Drake. A group of Apache warriors appeared on the ridge above them, perhaps a dozen, armed with rifles and traditional weapons. At their head was an older man with iron-gray hair and a face like carved stone. Drake's men saw them, and their courage failed. They wheeled their horses and fled back toward St. Catherine's. Drake hesitated, rage and calculation warring on his face. Then he too turned and rode away, but not before shouting a final threat. "This isn't over, Mercer. You're dead men, both of you." The Apache warriors descended from the ridge. The leader approached Jacob and Dakota, his rifle held casually but ready. He studied them both for a long moment, then spoke in accented but clear English. "I am Red Hawk War Leader of the Mescalero Band. We have been watching this school for many weeks, trying to find a way to free our children." His eyes settled on Dakota. "You are Chiricahua, daughter of Grey Wolf." "Yes," Dakota said. "We heard of you. The giant woman who killed soldiers at Fort Bowie who searched for her brother. Red Hawk's expression was unreadable. Some said you had betrayed your people. Others said you had gone mad with grief. I am not mad, and I have betrayed no one. I can see that now. Red Hawk lowered his rifle. This white man, he helps you. He saved my life. He helped me search for Naichi. We have become, Dakota glanced at Jacob, family. Red Hawk studied Jacob with new interest. A white man who fights to save Apache children. This is strange, but these are strange times. He gestured to his warriors. We are preparing an attack on the school tonight. We will free the children and kill the captain and his men. Wait, Jacob said. If you attack the army, we'll use it as justification for more violence. They'll say, "You're raiders, savages." It will make everything worse. And what is your suggestion, white man, that we leave our children in that place to be erased or sold? No, but there's a better way. Jacob pulled out the journal Sister Agnes had given him. This has records, names of children who were taken where they were sent. If we can get this to the authorities in Santa Fe, to people who care about justice, we can shut down Drake's operation legally. Your people's justice, Red Hawk spat. We have seen how that works. Not all whites are like Drake, Jacob insisted. There are good people who would be horrified by what's happening here. Give me a chance to reach them. And if you fail, then you attack the school. You'll have lost nothing but a few days. Red Hawk considered this. Finally he nodded. 3 days. If you have not returned with help in 3 days, we attack. He looked at Dakota. Will you come with us? You are Apache. You belong with your people. Dakota was quiet for a moment. Then she shook her head. My brother is in that school. I will not leave this territory until he is free. And Jacob needs help to reach Santa Fe. I go with him. You choose a white man over your own people. I choose the people who have stood beside me, Dakota said firmly. Jacob has proven himself. He has earned my loyalty. Red Hawk's expression softened slightly. Then go. But know this. If you fail, if you do not return with help, we will do what must be done. The children will be freed one way or another. He whistled, and his warriors melted back into the rocks, vanishing as if they had never been there. Jacob and Dakota stood alone, battered and exhausted, with 3 days to accomplish the impossible. Can we make it to Santa Fe in 3 days? Dakota asked. If we don't stop, if we don't sleep, if patience doesn't collapse under us. Jacob looked at his tired horse. It's possible. Barely. Then we ride. They mounted the horse and turned east toward Santa Fe, toward what might be salvation, or might be just another disappointment. Behind them, St. Catherine's stood like a prison, holding children whose identities were being systematically destroyed, including Naiche, who no longer remembered his name. The ride to Santa Fe was a nightmare of exhaustion and fear. They pushed patience mercilessly, the old mare giving everything she had. They stopped only to water her and let her rest for brief moments, then rode on through darkness and day alike. Jacob's shoulder wound reopened, blood soaking through his bandages. Dakota's leg swelled from the constant strain, but they kept riding, knowing that every hour that passed was an hour closer to Red Hawk's deadline. On the second day, they were spotted by an army patrol. Rather than run, Jacob made a desperate decision. He rode straight toward them, hands raised. "I need to speak to someone in authority," he shouted. "I have evidence of crimes being committed at St. Catherine's School." The patrol leader, a young lieutenant, looked skeptical. But something in Jacob's face and the urgency of his voice made him listen. "Come with us," the lieutenant said. "The territorial governor is in Santa Fe. If your evidence is real, he'll want to see it." They were escorted to Santa Fe, arriving on the evening of the second day. Filthy, exhausted, barely able to stand, they were brought before Governor Edmund Ross, a stern man with honest eyes. Jacob laid out everything. The children who disappeared, Drake's trafficking operation, Sister Agnes's journal with its damning records, the truth about what happened to Apache children sent to Indian schools. Governor Ross read the journal in silence, his face growing darker with each page. Finally he looked up. This is monstrous. If true. It's true, Jacob said. And if you don't act immediately, the Apache are going to attack the school. They've given me 3 days. We're almost out of time. Ross stood and summoned his aides. Prepare a cavalry company, not Captain Drake's unit. Pull men from Fort Union. I want them at St. Catherine's by tomorrow morning. He looked at Jacob. You'll guide them there? Yes, sir. And the Apache woman, she's wanted for killing soldiers. Jacob's hand moved toward his gun, but Dakota placed her hand on his arm. I am here, she said, her voice clear and strong. I killed soldiers who had taken my brother. I would do it again. But I will not run. Do what you think is right. Ross studied her for a long moment. The soldiers you killed were under Drake's command. If he's guilty of what this journal suggests, their deaths occurred in the course of his criminal enterprise. That changes things legally. He paused. For now you're free to go. Help us end this, and we'll discuss your status afterward. They rode out before dawn on the 3rd day, with 2 companies of cavalry arriving at St. Catherine's by mid-morning. Red Hawk and his warriors were waiting on the ridge, clearly prepared to attack. Jacob rode forward alone to meet them. The governor sent troops. They're here to arrest Drake and shut down his operation. Red Hawk studied the cavalry force, then nodded slowly. We will watch. If this is a trick, if they try to harm the children, we will intervene. The cavalry surrounded the school. Drake tried to resist, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. His men surrendered without a fight. Mother Superior was arrested along with Drake. Sister Agnes and several other nuns who had tried to help the children were spared. The children were brought out into the courtyard confused and frightened. Jacob and Dakota searched through them and finally found him. Naichi, who called himself Peter, stood among the others, his face blank. Dakota knelt before him, removing her veil so he could see her face clearly. Naichi, she said softly in Apache, little brother, do you remember me? The boy stared at her blankly. My name is Peter. I don't understand your savage language. Tears streamed down Dakota's face. She began to sing very softly a lullaby their mother had sung, the same lullaby she had sung to Naichi every night when he was small. For a long moment nothing happened. Then the boy's expression cracked. His eyes widened. His mouth opened. Dakota, he whispered. Yes, yes, little brother, I am here. Naichi's composure shattered. He threw himself into her arms, sobbing, crying out in Apache words tumbling over each other. I tried to forget. They said I had to forget. But I remembered. I remembered your voice, your songs. I remembered. Dakota held him, this small boy who was all she had left of her family, and wept. Jacob stood nearby, giving them space, his own eyes wet. Red Hawk descended from the ridge with his warriors. Governor Ross tensed, but the Apache leader simply walked to where Dakota knelt with her brother. The children, Red Hawk said. What happens to them now? Ross stepped forward. They'll be returned to their families if possible. Those whose families can't be found will be placed in better facilities, real schools where they'll be treated with dignity. Words, Red Hawk said. Easy to say. Then watch us, Ross replied. Hold us accountable. If we fail these children again, you'll have every right to take action. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete justice. But it was a beginning. Over the following weeks, the story of Drake's crimes spread across the territory. The trafficking operation was dismantled. Drake himself was tried and hanged. Jacob and Dakota attended the trial. Drake showed no remorse even as the evidence mounted. Sister Agnes's journal was read aloud, each name a nail in his coffin. When the judge pronounced the death sentence, Drake's cold eyes finally flickered with fear. He was hanged 3 days later at dawn. Jacob did not watch, but Dakota did. She owed Naichi that much. Other schools were investigated, and while not all were as corrupt as St. Catherine's reforms, were begun. Jacob's shoulder healed fully. Dakota's leg grew stronger, and slowly, day by day, Naichi began to remember who he had been, his Apache name, his language, his stories. 3 months after the raid on St. Catharines, they stood together at the edge of Jacob's old ranch. The cabin was gone, burned by someone, probably bounty hunters, looking for revenge. Only the 2 crosses remained marking where Sarah and Thomas rested. "What will you do now?" Red Hawk asked. He had become an unlikely ally working with Governor Ross to help Apache children transition back to their families. Jacob looked at Dakota and Naichi. "I think we'll head north. Colorado maybe. Start fresh somewhere. No one knows our story." "You will still be a white man living with Apache," Red Hawk pointed out. "That will bring trouble." "Trouble seems to find us anyway," Jacob said with a slight smile. "Might as well choose where we face it." Dakota took his hand, her grip warm and strong. Naichi stood between them, holding both their hands, a bridge between 2 worlds. "We are family now," she said simply. "Where we go together." They mounted their horses and rode away from the ranch, away from the graves, away from the past. Behind them, the desert stretched endlessly under a cloudless sky. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenged the constant struggle of being a family that defied every convention of their time, but also hope, also love, also the possibility of peace. Jacob Mercer had spent 3 years dead inside, haunted by ghosts, waiting for an end that never came. Then a dying woman in a canyon had given him a reason to live again, had shown him that healing was possible, that family could be chosen, that love came in unexpected forms. Now he rode toward an unknown future, with a giant of a woman who had become his partner, his friend, his family, with a boy who called him uncle and was learning to laugh again, with purpose and meaning and the knowledge that he had helped prevent terrible evil. It wasn't the life he had planned. It wasn't the life anyone would have predicted. But it was his life, and he was grateful for every hard-won moment of it. The 3 of them rode into the morning sun toward whatever came next together. And behind them, if you listened carefully, you might have heard the wind singing through the desert grass, carrying the whisper of names. Sarah, Thomas, all the lost ones, all the saved ones, all the ones still waiting for someone to remember them. They rode into the morning sun, 3 souls bound by choice and courage. Behind them the wind carried whispers of names: Sarah, Thomas, all the lost ones, all the saved. The story was over. The living went on.